Good afternoon and welcome to Marketing Live for Thursday, June the 23rd, 2016. I'm your host, Rob Zinkin. I serve as Associate Vice President for Marketing at Indiana University. Thanks so much for being a part of today's broadcast. I hope you're having a productive summer with the end of the fiscal year coming up. Summer affords, hopefully at least, an opportunity or two for reflection, and that's our focus today. To reflect on our profession, what's happening in our sector. And it's a privilege to do the work that we do to make a difference for our institutions. And CASE, the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, is there to support that work. So I'm delighted that we have Michael Kiser, newly appointed Vice President for Marketing and Communications at CASE, to engage in this discussion this afternoon. Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Live broadcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. All episodes of Marketing Live are free and accessible in the video archives at higheredlive.com and in podcast format on iTunes. Today's live viewing experience is powered by Maestro, the premier marketing tech platform for broadcasters. Higher Ed Live is produced by Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Thanks, as always, to Stoner. So let me welcome once again today's guest, Michael Kiser. Just last month, Michael stepped into his VP role at the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, where he leads the communications and marketing strategy to further CASE's global mission and vision. And he is no stranger to CASE, having been a frequent speaker and faculty member in CASE educational programs. And Michael has a wealth of experience on campus as well, most recently serving in vice president positions at Lafayette College and Colby College. And he has also hosted Higher Ed Live. And Michael, it was great to see you at the CASE Annual Conference on Marketing and Branding earlier this month in Washington, D.C., and so good now to have you on the program. So congratulations again on your new position with CASE. That, of course, is among the many items that we'll discuss today, but congrats again and nice to see you.
Thanks, Rob. It's great to see you again, too. And it's nice to see you carrying the torch more ably than I did with Higher Ed Live, but good for you, good for Stoner, and good for this program. It's great stuff.
Well, thank you very much, and looking forward to our discussion today. And to begin with, and I'm sure many are familiar with you, but I'd still like to give viewers an opportunity to go beyond that bio that I just briefly went through a bit. And so I'll ask Michael if you could share something from your career path, your professional journey, whether that's a specific experience or anything noteworthy that has had a lasting impact on you, your work, your career.
I can think of a few things, so I'll try to keep it fairly brief. But one interesting sort of tidbit is that the first person I ever met who was engaged with CASE was Ray Goldsmith. And some people watching this probably remember Ray. Ray, in fact, held this position for about 7 or 8 years. I met her, 15 years ago, maybe, when I was just kind of coming into leadership roles in higher ed. So, that kind of marked the beginnings of my affiliation with CASE, and then that proceeded through the, sort of the path that you've taken as well. First attending and then volunteering and presenting. I was named to the commission on marketing and communications last fall. And now, of course, I've oddly enough ended up in Ray's chair. So literally Ray's chair, I think. So that's kind of strange. I cannot look back at my career and not reflect on my time at Virginia Tech. I was there for about 6 years. Those were some interesting and difficult years in a lot of ways. I was there during the shootings there. And I think, just from a career perspective, I was the director of development and communications there. My career path just sort of took a leap there, partly because I had a great boss and mentor, a guy named Larry Hinker, who I think a lot of people probably know. Larry recently retired, but we stay in contact. Obviously the shooting was something that we all hope we never have to go through, and that had some very profound impacts on me personally and professionally. I did learn there the value of a really tight dedicated team in those kinds of circumstances. But even if you strip that out, one of the things that I learned there that really has informed the way I've worked and the kind of thinking I do now is this very tight integration between marketing communications functions and more traditional fundraising functions, and how powerful it is when you can align those messages. We did that extremely well at Virginia Tech, and the campaign, despite the bumpiness created in the wake of that horrible incident, was a huge success. And I've been building shops from here on out that kind of take that into account, that really tighten up the difference in what we here call advancement. And we could talk about that term later if you like, but that's something that I've focused on for a long, long time. And I think it's something that we would all do well to remember, that these messaging platforms are not as separate and distinct as you imagine they might be. And there's an awful lot to be gained when you can close that gap and get all those people at the table. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to pick back up on that and return to that point. But it does remind me our paths first crossed being on the faculty together at a CASE campaign communications conference back in 2012. And I do remember a lot of discussion about that integration and the benefit to the institution as a whole. So your career has been dotted with CASE throughout, no matter the institution where you've been, but playing a very active role as a CASE volunteer. So I'd love to hear more about why CASE and why now. What will your new role entail, and what excites you most about the opportunity that you have?
Well, why CASE and why now? I mean, again, if you look back, as I said, my sort of career started really advancing when I got involved with CASE. Ray was a big part of that. There's so many resources available, and I took full advantage of those. I think you learn a lot along the way, whether you're teaching or listening, either one of those things. Honestly, Rob, I'd gotten to the point where I just was thinking more and more about the profession and what the profession has done for me. I'm a first-generation college student. I really honestly could have never imagined, had you asked me, 40 years ago, where I would be. This certainly wouldn't have been one of the answers. So it's a combination of things. I think, first of all, the awareness that education really does transform lives, and those of us who are in the trenches every day sometimes need to be reminded of that. We're busy trying to make deadlines and get campaigns to work and whatever it may be. But at the core, I think we work in the service of an incredibly powerful group of institutions. So I think, to me, it's partly that the profession has given me so much, opportunity. And I looked at this opportunity, which kind of came to me in a sideways way. I wasn't really seeking it out, but I mean, I knew the opportunity was here. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, how great would it be to be in a position where you could help advance the profession that helped advance you? And that's exactly what I feel about being here. I mean, I think this organization has an unbelievable track record and a really bright, robust future ahead of it, helping everybody meet those kinds of challenges so that the institutions we serve can do what they do the best. So that was the sweet spot for me. And of course, it was a bit of a soft landing for me because I know a lot of people here. I've worked with a lot of people over the years. I've written for Currents Magazine. I've chaired a couple of conferences. We met at one. So it wasn't like I was landing in an organization with which I was unfamiliar amongst a lot of people that I was unfamiliar with. So, in a strange way, it just feels like this is where I was supposed to end up. And I love DC. I've always loved DC. I live a couple miles from the office, so my wife and I are living right here in the city, and it's a great place to live, and this is a great place to work. So lucky me.
Well, that's great. And in addition to all of that, Michael, it seems that it's a unique moment in the time of CASE as an organization. New leadership, obviously, with Sue Cunningham taking over last year, undertaking a strategic planning process. So it seems like you're in a moment of time where there's a great opportunity to provide leadership to move the organization to the next level.
Yeah, you're right about Sue. I mean, Sue's an extraordinary leader, I had one of those moments when I first met her when I thought, wow, is this the real deal? And so I did my due diligence and got lots of feedback that yes, indeed, she is all that. It is an interesting time for Case. We are, as most people might know, and we hope will know very soon, we're rolling out a new membership model that eliminates the premier level membership, which used to give you access to all sorts of resources that the institutional members did not get. That premier membership is going away. So what that means is now every member of the advancement team in any member institution has access to all of those resources, including the magazine, including the used to be called the info center, now called the library, which is, I think, um, a really powerful tool that a lot of folks might not be using. And so we're going to try to make sure people know more about that. Um, Free access anytime to all of the webinars we create. It's kind of a game changer. I think it's going to open up our resources and services to an awful lot of people. Part of my job is to make sure that folks at your institution and other institutions are aware of that kind of benefit. So I just had a conversation this morning with some folks in marketing about the need to really work with membership coordinators on every campus to make sure that the word is out. So that's a big deal. That's rolling out. Soft launch on the 1st of July. That kind of paywall, if you will come down. But middle of July around Summit, we'll announce that in a big way. And then we're buttoning up the strategic plan as we speak, and we hope to have that approved by the board shortly, and we'll roll that out in the fall. Um, that's a really, really interesting and challenging platform. And we're looking at lots of new opportunities, maybe the most significant of which is sort of a rededication to the idea of member engagement. I mean, I think, we live in an age where we want the content that we need when we want it and in the way we want it. And I think Case is recommitting. We've always done that, but I think Case is kind of recommitting to figure out what's that look like in the years ahead. That's a little bit different, perhaps, than it has been. Um, we're thinking a lot about talent management. That's another kind of key piece of the strategic plan. And by that, I mean, how can we develop both a pipeline for bringing talented young professionals into this trade, because it's really important. And then how can we sustain their growth in this trade so they, as happened to me, find the resources they need to move into more and more influential positions. That's a big deal. We're thinking a lot more about thought leadership and the role Case can play, and kind of, we have a very vigorous kind of research arm here and lots of resources at our disposal. So we're thinking more and more about how can Case get in the lead in sort of thought leadership around some of the issues affecting institutions. And the last piece, and probably, well, certainly the biggest in terms of scope and size, and that is, I'm not sure a lot of people know this, but we are very much a global organization, and we have offices in London, in Singapore, in Mexico City. We're starting to do some work in Africa, mainly working through Nairobi. A lot of institutions in Africa. The effect of education is the same everywhere you go. And what we're finding is there's a lot of interesting things happening in this field. Our task, of course, is to figure out how do we identify and create the resources that will meet the needs of those constituencies where they are and where education is at the moment right there. Um, Also, it's I think important to note that a lot of people around the world are dealing with the same kind of challenges in marketing communications that we are here in the United States. We tend to look at one another and think, uh, we're looking at our colleagues in other states, or maybe in within our conference or whatever. We're always carefully eyeing one another, but we've got a lot of folks. The London office in Case Europe is a very big community. I'll be going to Brussels. I think at the end of August for that conference. That's a huge conference, and they're doing great work in marketing communications. Same in Singapore, uh, and same in Latin America. So yeah, I mean, it is a good time. It's a great time to have landed here. Sue is now a year into her presidency, and having worked for some new presidents, maybe you've had that experience too. That's the sweet spot right there too. That's when a president kind of settles down. Her cabinet is now full. We've got a new strategic plan pretty much locked up, and we're ready to go. So couldn't be a better time to be here, I don't think.
Yeah, terrific. And obvious that you're ready to go, Michael, because I thought, well, we'll get you on at some point, maybe in the summer before the fall starts. You only just started a few weeks ago last month, and here you are ready to
That's
just
right.
jump right in.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
so thank you for that. I do think you're right, though, that sometimes we probably forget about the global scale of CASE, and I'm not sure how many institutions, maybe as many as 4,000 colleges and universities represented in 75 to 80 countries. And you mentioned that a lot of similarities in the challenges that are faced by colleagues in those countries working in higher ed. But I'm just interested if there are any other tidbits or interesting things that you've learned in just your first few weeks about CASE's presence, CASE's work in some of those other countries.
It's funny. I had one-on-one conversations with everybody in my division. That's about 20 some odd people here. Some others overseas I haven't had a chance to do that with yet. But one thing that kept coming up in those conversations is a belief here in headquarters in Washington, D.C., uh, a strong belief in the value of what CASE is providing. And I think that's something that I felt as a member. I mean, one of the interesting perspectives I guess I have coming here, having been a longtime member, is I know what it's like to have, had the advantage of CASE kind of at my shoulder all along. And it's really, really encouraging to find that people here, people who work for CASE, are aware of that value and are constantly thinking about ways to enhance that, whether that's through delivery methods or content or other resources, research, whatever it might be. Um, I think that the depth of that commitment uh, on both floors of this building, and the 70 or 80 people who work here in Washington, uh, that's been really surprising and really encouraging to me. So um, that puts us in a good position to move forward with the strategic plan, which is really about, how do we refine our capacity to be of even more value? And I think that's in keeping with what I've sensed just in the first few weeks that I've been here, that um, folks here seem to really understand what we're about, and they really seem to understand that the support we provide has this really profound kind of amplifying effect, right? I mean, I think we're helping folks like you do your job better so that you, Rob, can help your institution do its job better. And the net result of that is lives get transformed through education. So uh, that awareness is very powerful in this building, and it makes it a really nice environment to come to work every day. I can tell you that for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. And when I think of my own engagement with CASE, and we've talked about a few of those conferences, and I think of CASE District 5, we even have a state chapter of CASE in Indiana. So I probably default to the conferences first, and maybe that's the case for others as well. But you've talked about many of the areas that CASE touches on, but I bet there is that default among many to think of conferences first. So what are some of the things that people maybe don't know about CASE that they probably should?
Well, I mentioned already the library, formerly the Info Center. That is an amazing wealth of information. I mean, if you go there and search a particular topic, what you will find is all the resources we have available on that topic. And that will include things like, notices of conferences coming up for sure, but also any article that has appeared in Currents, any research that we've done, any white papers we've released or sponsored, or there's a ton of samples there. I know for years, whenever I had to write a job description, the first thing I did was check the Info Center at CASE, because there's so many samples there, and that's a great place to start. So I would give a particular shout out to the library. I think the webinars are going to be something that people will really find great value in, particularly now that we've opened up that whole catalog to the entire membership. So they will be available free of charge to anybody who wants to watch them at any time. There's a wealth of knowledge there. And you mentioned the district conferences. I mean, I'm going to be out. I'm not sure how much of a travel schedule I'll be able to maintain, because there's a lot to be done here in DC, but I want to make sure I'm out regularly attending district conferences, speaking to district chairs and district councils to find out what we can do to serve them better. And I say that because essentially, you know, the membership is kind of that's the core, that's the lifeblood of what we do. I mean, we hold a lot of knowledge here in headquarters, but we also, I think, have this really interesting role of being kind of a conduit to take the knowledge of all of these practitioners across the country, some brilliant people, and make sure that knowledge gets funneled through us to other practitioners. And to me, that's kind of at the core, particularly what district conferences can do. Um, and I've always been struck by the collegiality of this profession, at least as I experienced it through CASE. I mean, and so that's an important part of it. I mean, I think the conferences are great both on the national level, and you and I have taken part in those. Um, but those district conferences are really important too. And so, you know, folks who are out there can expect to see me show up. I know Sue shows up at quite a few of those. My colleague Rob Henry will be making an appearance at a lot of those too. So we do like to get out there. We do like to meet the members, and we do like them to understand that we're aware that much of what we do because of their commitment and their volunteerism and their intellect and their ideas. I mean, that's inescapable. So.
Great. And a reminder to viewers, if you have a question for Michael or a comment about CASE, anything, feel free to tweet us using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. And now that we've covered all things CASE, I'd love to transition into our profession and higher ed, marketing communications function. And your opening comments, Michael, you talked about this and the term advancement. And I've been intrigued with some of Sue's writings about the lack of a clearly shared definition globally when it comes to that word advancement, and that it should encompass our collective efforts and our broadest intent, although many may have a narrower definition that relates just to development, to philanthropy. So I know where you stand on this, but I would really like to hear you elaborate on that point too, and really how the marketing and communications role, ever evolving role, fits into that broader advancement picture.
Well, it's interesting, Rob, because I think you mentioned to me not too long ago that you surveyed some of your colleagues in the Big Ten about sort of this issue. I think what we see sort of across the whole sector is an awful lot of confusion about what that means. And that confusion is reflected in organizational structures. I mean, you find vice presidents for advancement. I just spoke to a colleague last night who works in a shop in which there's a VP for advancement, and all the communications and branding comes up through that VP for advancement. So clearly, advancement at his institution has a very broad meaning. And yet we all know other institutions where advancement has that more constricted meaning. You know, I think that is an issue that we really need to get beyond somehow. And I do think that the organizational piece is a reflection of that. But we are aware, and we think about this a lot, that you know, many people understand CASE to be about advancement in that restricted sense. We get that, and I think we've played a really strong role in that sort of philanthropy and fundraising side. We have a lot of assets on the communications and marketing side as well, and we're building those out. I'm having a lot of good conversations with both practitioners within higher ed, as well as a lot of smart people who most of us know, Michael Stoner being one of them, and many others, about where CASE can sort of more effectively program and how we might be thinking more and more about how to beef up that curriculum. I mean, in the end, I think it's a question of nomenclature, and that's not to dismiss it and say that that's unimportant. But I would like to see us somehow as a profession understand that that is perhaps a distinction without a difference, or it should be a distinction without a difference. I go back to my experience at Virginia Tech, in which, as the director of development communications, I did not report to anybody in development. I reported to Larry Hinker, who was the AVP for University Relations. So there, the structure, I think, made it clear that there was a very strong connection between those two things. And a lot of what I did there was work with fundraisers to help them understand what we do in marketing um, is sort of paving the way for you. So when you go out there to make that ask, when you go out there to cultivate or talk to a donor, understand that they've already been touched by our marketing again and again and again. So the perception that we've shaped is the perception we hope that they hold. And you'll be a much more effective fundraiser if you recognize that and work within that sort of framework. So ultimately, I think my hope is that the practice of these kinds of integrated approaches will make that nomenclature become less and less of a stumbling block. But yeah, I mean, I'm aware that it is, and that's something we think a lot about here. So.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned how I mentioned the survey that I did with Big Ten colleagues, and just for a little bit of context on that, this was for the recent CASE annual conference on marketing and branding. Bill Campbell from Chatham University and I gave a presentation on marketing, organizational structures, and budget trends. So for that, I had surveyed all of my Big Ten colleagues, and the CMO position or equivalent is called something different at every single institution. And so I think that is a reflection of large public research institutions are complex places like many colleges and universities. So somewhat a reflection of that, but also while marketing is increasingly getting a seat at the table, new CMO type positions reporting to the president, the chancellor, it is getting to the leadership table increasingly, but there's still some degree of marketing is trying to find its place, its fit in academia. So you've been on the front lines of all of this in previous positions, and now having a different perspective with CASE and seeing it from that side. So I'm very interested. What are your thoughts on the evolution of the role, the function of marketing, and even more specifically that chief marketing officer position for institutions?
Yeah, it's interesting to get to the point in your career where you recognize that you've kind of were at the forefront of something that's now quite common. So I guess that's hindsight for you. But yeah, I mean, I benefited directly from this growing awareness of the importance of these kinds of functions on campuses, because when I started 15, 16 years ago, this was very uncommon, and I think you wouldn't have found at that point more than a handful of people with marketing in their title, or a handful of departments with marketing explicitly in their profile. So we've certainly come a long way from that. I think we had a similar kind of issue with the B word, right, with branding. And I mean, it's safe to say that functionally speaking, most institutions have gone beyond that. What I'm seeing now, for example, a colleague of mine on the commission is the chief marketing officer at a major institution, and she's coming out of a really hardcore marketing background, no higher ed experience, and she's doing some amazing work because she's bringing some of those really effective practices that have been in place for a long time in that sector to our sector. And I think that's kind of a natural evolution. As our business becomes more and more competitive and more difficult to succeed in and excel in, I think we're going to be continuing to looking for practices that work the best. It's a bit of an aside, but I know there are lots of institutions now who are starting to really dive into big data in a way that is much more reminiscent, I think, of perhaps marketing outside of higher ed than it is inside higher ed. But if you talk about impact and value in something like alumni engagement, I mean, those are incredible tools. So we've seen this happen again and again and again. I think people are coming around to the idea. Again, it's nomenclature. Perhaps that nomenclature represents some reluctance to fully adopt these practices. But in the end, I think it's about whether or not the practices are successful or not. I think if institutions thrive, as many do, by employing these kinds of principles and hiring smart folks in this field, again, that nomenclature becomes kind of not a moot point, but not a point to lose a lot of sleep over. So.
One other thing, just thinking back to the marketing and branding conference, there were a couple of times where I recall attendees saying, I wish my president or chancellor was here to hear that, or I wish you could say that to my president or chancellor. And next month, you will have presidents and chancellors for the Case Summit for Leaders in Advancement. I know you get many top-level executives for that conference, which is a great one, and I've attended in the past. And I've also noticed perhaps more marketing, communications, programming there, because it is a more strategic function for institutions, a priority area for chancellors and presidents. So you know, we've talked about this from the perspective of marketers, from communicators, and what's your take on what presidents are thinking? You've worked directly with institutional leaders, and give us the vantage point from that side of the table.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm not sure when my conversion took place, but you know, at some point, it, as our capacity to generate meaningful metrics has grown, the power of those metrics to demonstrate whether or not an approach is succeeding or failing has grown. And so I can't imagine a leader who is completely immune to that sort of analysis. So for really the last 6 or 7 years, I mean, from small measures to large measures, I've really relied heavily on metrics and numbers to make my case, case lowercase. So I mean, I think that's a philosophy that a lot of people are picking up on. I think, as you know, we have a wealth of information at our disposal. We have an awful lot of things that we can measure, and sometimes the most difficult thing is to figure out what exactly do we want to measure. I mean, but I think more and more as people like you, like me, like a lot of my talented colleagues, people you and I know, begin to understand the power of this kind of approach more effectively, and are getting seats at the table, at, you know, in the C-suite. That sort of analysis is really hard to deny, and so I think there's an increased appetite for that at upper levels as well. And I think presidents, you know, are certainly as adaptable as any of us, and provided we get the right information in front of them and we do our analysis well, we make our case well. I don't think we're going to see anything but an increased growth in that, and one would hope that that will come with an increase in marketing budgets as well, because we all know that kind of work is not inexpensive. It can be, but you know, long-term, big picture metrical analysis is, you know, as we know, a pretty significant undertaking. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And you pinpointed that there's often that challenge or struggle of what exactly are we measuring, and that even goes back further to, at the end of the day, what are you trying to affect? What is the outcome that you're aiming for? And I think it seems like such a simple question, but it's not always an easy one to target, because that could be enrollment, it could be quantity of students, quality of students, it could be fundraising related, it could be brand strength, it could be so many different things, it could be all of the above. And so you know, marketers are tasked with doing so many different things, and we know the missions of our institutions are so broad, are so diverse, but we really have to be able to hone in on what are those 1, 2, 3 key priorities that we're moving the needle on.
yeah. Does the word dashboard mean anything to you? I mean,
Yeah.
we're all talking about dashboards at this point, right? And I think that's all of that talk is an attempt to kind of distill from this sea of data, what are the sort of key indicators that we want to measure and look for? I mean, there are lots of things you can do on a smaller scale. And, you know, interestingly, I've had a lot of conversations over the years with folks in annual giving, because, you know, for people in annual giving, they tend to rely on a very cut and dried measure. And in what is today the 23rd, so in about a week or so, you know, they're not going to be looking at that participation rate as an effective but a really blunt measure of alumni engagement. But I think, you know, because we can, and because we know what we know now, I think there are larger picture analytics to look at that are more about, I mean, we can more effectively measure engagement now. And as I used to say to a lot of board members who, fretted and were always wringing their hands about participation rate, um, this is not a 1 year problem to fix, right? We might gain a point or two here or there, but that's going to be a response to a very specific kind of campaign that we put together. And then next year, we're going to start again, perhaps a little bit higher. Um, but if you look at this in sort of a 5-year window, a 7-year window, and you start thinking about how does philanthropy get some traction with even students who are just arriving, um, you know, if you begin to measure the engagement of that group, engagement broadly in a lot of ways, then I think you can, in fact, have a more profound impact on that other measure of engagement as they become alums, which we all watch, and that's the participation rate. So, I think it is hard to determine, what do you want to measure, what do you want to aim for, and I think it has to do with breaking things down into very kind of discrete chunks, and then perhaps looking at those, at some combination of those measures that in different ways can give you greater insight into what impact you're having on your audience. And ultimately, I would imagine that in the most general terms, we want our students and our alums and our faculty and our staff to be engaged with the institution. And if we've told our brand story in a compelling and authentic way, and if we're using vehicles that are effective and trustworthy and credible, then I think we can find some approximation of that broader level engagement just by looking at a number of those different metrics. But it's certainly not an easy thing to do. I don't think you come in every morning and run a few Excel spreadsheets and say, we've gotten there. So I don't think we ever really get there. I think we just work to get better and better at it every day. So
I like, Michael, how you've painted that picture in a way that reminds me one of the many ways that I value CASE, and having that more holistic perspective, and thinking of our work almost in a life cycle sort of manner, whether that's communications, marketing to prospective students, current students, but obviously the alumni development piece, and the journey of engagement that a person may have with the institution over the span of a lifetime, beginning with making one of the most important decisions of one's life and what college to attend, and then the level of engagement that can ensue as a student, and then after graduation. And so that lifelong thing, that it's one of the things that makes work in higher education so exciting and rewarding. And so anyway, just a long way of saying I like how you painted that sort of picture for us, because it does speak to the life cycle sort of engagement that we have, and the depth of the impact that our work can have.
Well, I know for a fact that you and I made really smart decisions about where to go to college. I know that, right?
Amen.
So.
Yes, that was. I remember when we first connected for the conference, and learning how in the world are two alumni from a small liberal arts all male college, Wabash College in Indiana, in Miami together. So, and here we are in Higher Ed Live. So
right, that's right.
Can always circle things back to Wabash, which is a fun thing to do.
Strange names.
Well, we've talked about a lot of areas related to the work of marketing and communications professionals, and there are probably some who are maybe not to that point of dashboards and really driving and honing in on the ROI, but trying to increase the level of significance that marketing has within their organization and institution. So interested in any other opportunities beyond what you've talked about and highlighted for marketers, for communicators to meaningfully make a difference, advance their institutions in the coming fiscal year and beyond. Where are some of those other opportunities that professionals should be thinking about?
Well, you know what? I mean, you know this, Rob, because you were kind enough to be on the faculty for me when we did that campaign communications conference down in Miami. I always want, and I'm in a little better position to control that now than I used to be, but if I recruit faculty to do things for CASE, I always want them to make sure that the lessons are applicable independent of resources, right? I mean, it's one thing to go up there and say, well, my 78-person staff managed to do this, but the reality is we know that a lot of people are working very hard in very tight times and very tight budgets. And Case, as you know, represents a lot of independent schools as well as colleges and universities. So um, that's a particular question. I mean, I do think that if you step back a little bit, even in a small shop, you know, this idea of kind of integrating your messaging across all platforms is one that it doesn't take a large staff to implement. What it takes is a kind of a large and expansive intellect, I guess. Um, you have to think about if if you are certain about your brand position and your distinctive qualities, and I'll grant you that's a tough thing to be certain about. Um, I would encourage people, even in smaller shops, to be thinking about how is that reinforced by every communication you make. So, for example, if you're soliciting alums for the annual fund, how is that solicitation tied to what you know to be the positive feelings that they already have about the institution? Um, and I think, that I've had the good fortune to be able to build teams in a couple of places in which we've been able to turn that corner and start thinking more and more about our role as advancing, as opposed to advancement, the institution and the institution's messages. I mean, I think it's one thing to spend your days thinking about, oh my gosh, we got to get the magazine out on time, or oh gee, we got to get this web feature up. But I always ask people to reserve some portion of their intellect to be thinking about that bigger picture, and that is, how is what I'm doing right now advancing the brand narrative of this institution? That's not a function of the size of staff or the size of your resources. I think it's just a question of being able to step back and, again, look at that in a more expansive way. It's often really difficult to do when you are faced, like all of us, with kind of a tsunami of deadlines and details and proofs and revisions and everything else. But I would encourage people to create the intellectual space to do that. And I would also encourage people to be thinking about the teams that they manage and supervise, and how much intellectual space do they have? Because I think if you can clear out some of that space, if you can, uh, take down some of those guardrails that are keeping people sort of locked on a particular target, you often uncover an incredible amount of creative energy and thought that can, in fact, serve a larger purpose in ways that are really surprising. And that kind of work is really engaging. That's not a function
Mhm.
of bandwidth, and I'm sure you've seen this too. People who feel and perhaps really are strapped and overworked often find all new kinds of bandwidth when they are engaged in tasks that are creative and collaborative and thoughtful and innovative in that way. So um, again, I don't think that's a function of staff size. I think that's a function of just mindset. And so I think all marketing communications people would do well to kind of just step back every once in a while and think, okay, we met all of our deadlines there and we met budget, but is there anything in this particular project that really drove uh, the point home about the value of this institution? And if not, what's it going to take to get to that point? So I've often pulled aside smaller teams, sort of handpicking people from different functions and different disciplines and given them a particular task to solve. In other words, I remember at Lafayette, we had a particular sort of soft rate of alumni engagement with a particular generation. There were lots of reasons for that. But I pulled that group aside, sort of kind of out of their day-to-day activity to say, okay, here's the problem. How are we going to solve that collectively? And I can't tell you how much fun it was to have like a social media person in the room, a web developer in the room, a designer in the room, a content creator in the room with no other task other than to solve that problem. Um, and that's the kind of work that I think we all ought to be doing more. If you can split your brain into those kinds of segments, all the better. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I do think it has to do more of just sort of expanding your intellect and your definition about what success looks like for you. Because ultimately, we have to drive home the value of the associations and the institutions we serve. So,
Right, right. And when you talk about brand narrative, and without question, it's not just the marketers and communicators that own that narrative, it's the entire institution and every faculty member and staff member. And you've been in the position as a new vice president, a newly created vice president level role at an institution where you've had to go and get the buy-in across campus and make sure that your colleagues, faculty, others both understand and value the role that you play and that the function plays, and the importance of this strategic, holistic approach that you were talking about. So one of the last things I wanted to ask about is any tricks of the trade, because it's a theme that we visit often in some of these discussions, especially as we talk about brand strategy. And we all know that it needs to be an inclusive process, that people are only going to support what they help to create. But it can be easier said than done. It takes time. It takes discipline to do that. And what are some of the things that you've done that has brought you success and has created buy-in across campus as you work through some of those issues and in your different career stops?
this is a totally private conversation, right, Rob? Look, ultimately, I don't know, maybe this is a trick of the trade. Maybe it's something a little less flattering than that. If there are groups on campus, whether it's faculty or other administrative departments, or who are suspicious or a little cagey, or who don't like the idea of kind of what they perceive to be an all-consuming brand. I mean, look, I'm the kind of person who, when I was at Colby, I don't want to say I fought the fight, but I was troubled by the way people answered the phone. So, because to me, that's branding, that's marketing. I mean, I wanted
Sure.
people to answer the phone in a way that was so. That aside, I always try to figure out how can we in marketing communications use the skills and the tools that we have to be of service to someone else. So, for example, often with faculty, they are they don't often have the kind of administrative support or staff support to do a lot of the kind of newsletters that they want to do, or the web updating that they want to do, or so I always look for a way first that we can do a service for them. That, I think, demonstrates to them the value of our organization, and it builds a level of trust, so that eventually, when we sit down and have what are those difficult conversations about the need for a kind of consistent visual identity across every department on campus, um, I want to be at that table having done some service for them first, made their life easier in some way. And that may be that may not be a project that you have time for. That might not be a project that has a really high strategic value for you. But ultimately, if you can demonstrate to them that you want to make their lives easier, then they're going to listen a little more closely when you try to explain what, frankly, for many, is a kind of unusual and foreign concept. And that is, you know, we really all will benefit from a consistent visual identity, from a consistent platform of brand messages. I mean, I think most of us on campuses have to realize that, the prevailing ethos, reasonably, is about diversity of opinion, is about diversity around the student body. And so in some ways, what we talk about, this more cohesive, compact version of a narrative, is anathema to that. I mean, that just seems, those seem to be really at odds. But I think what people don't understand, and what we have to convince them, is that the brand narratives we tell can in fact be both consistent and expansive. They can, in fact, if you take a look at a place like Virginia Tech, and I remember being sort of stunned when I first got there, thinking, wow, how's this going to work, right? 19 fundraising units, and all kinds of colleges off doing all kinds of interesting things. You too are in a place where there's a ton of variance in what you do. But the narratives that we tell, properly constructed, can in fact contain all that. No one is going to listen to that until you've demonstrated to them that you care about the quality of their sort of day-to-day experience. Find something you can do for them that indicates that you come to the table not with a demand, but with a request for a dialogue, and prove your good intentions by doing something that makes their life a little bit easier. And I think you'll find you'll have a lot more success that way for sure.
Great. Well, that's, I think, some good advice to think about and close the conversation today. And it's been a great pleasure, Michael, and appreciate all the insights. Happy for you and your new role. Happy for Case, and wish you nothing but continued success. So thank you again.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate your asking me. It's been great to see you as always. And someday I'm going to recruit you to come again, do a faculty thing again. So just stand by.
All right. It was good stuff. Right. So appreciate it. Be sure to get reminders about this and other episodes. You can subscribe to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can browse the archives at higheredlive.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes for Michael's private conversation comments and other great episodes. So thanks again for tuning in to Marketing Live. I'm Rob Zinkin, and we'll see you next month on the Higher Ed Live Network.
Thanks, everybody.